let me ask you a question. How much do you know about cyber? How much do you know about what a cyber attack or a hack could mean to you and your family here in the United States? Admittedly, I don't know enough. And it's one of the reasons that I asked this guest to come on the show, John Murchison. John is a network IT engineer turned intelligence officer turned CEO. He's a former NSA computer operations expert, and he's the founder and CEO of Blackpoint Cyber. In 2023, his company was secured in one of the largest deals in cybersecurity for $190 million from Bain and Axel. Blackpoint's mission is to provide effective, affordable, real-time threat detection and response to organizations of all sizes around the world. But here's the thing. All of the things that led him to that point, both government and private sector, have conspired to create a point of view that is extremely common sense, informative, and I'm just going to open the aperture through conversation. And we're going to talk about cyber. We're going to talk about his run in the NSA, counterproliferation, what it means to you and me as citizens. And when we think about Iran and their nuclear program, what we should be thinking about that. But then we're going to bring it home, and we're going to talk about homeland security, and we're going to talk about the risks that exist with drones and cyber attacks, so that individuals and communities can continue to ask themselves the hard questions, and more importantly, have the meaningful conversations that will open the aperture up for how you take care of your own. The other thing that I think is really cool about this interview is we have conversations just around interagency collaboration and some of the challenges that exist in that world that are very universal to your world as well. It's all about bridging those in-groups and out-groups, social capital, trust, human connection. Also, I had the honor to have John over at the house with Yanni. And what a cool meeting between these two CEOs who've really just built it from the ground up, built very, very effective organizations, and they didn't forget who they were along the way. And just seeing those two guys interact with each other at the house while we're cooking some burgers, it's definitely something you should check out. That's only available on Patreon. It's not here, but we want to, it's important at the Scott Mann Podcast that we model what leadership and connection looks like in real time. And we thought that was the best way to do it, not just in the chairs as we sit here. So make sure you check out that behind-the-scenes footage on the Scott Mann page at Patreon, and let's jump into the show. Welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast, where we connect like our lives depend on it. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Scott Mann Podcast. Really, really cool episode that we've got today. John Murchison is joining us, and what you're going to see with John, I mean, we're going to go a couple of different directions here, but his background with the NSA, fascinating, and I think it'll just be helpful to just get, because that's a super important organization, particularly with what's going on in the world today. And without, compromising anything, we can just understand that organization a little better. And also as a result of your experiences or his experiences there, John's going to help lift the tent up on some things that really pertain to you in terms of cyber, and that kind of thing. And then even looking abroad at some programs and policies that affect us and will still affect us, and understanding those a little bit better. It's the first time I've had the opportunity to sit down and really have a meaningful conversation with someone of John's background, with the NSA around cyber, but also just as a business person as well. What you've built, what John's built, is just phenomenal, and there's so much we can take away. And remember that the through line on all of this is human connection. So even in this technical realm, what I'm going to endeavor to do, and John and I've talked about, is just to keep bringing it back to human connection. And even in the most technical demands that are out there, there's always the application of human connection in what we do. So can't wait to get into it. John, welcome, man.
Thank you. Really appreciate the invite.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big backstory guy.
Yeah.
I think it's just always helpful to get a sense of the other person and what's going on and what got you to where you are. So I think maybe just start a little bit before we get into some of the more hard-hitting stuff. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and kind of your journey
Yeah. No, I lived a really awesome childhood, to be totally clear. Awesome family, youngest of four. My older brother really helped me kind of get into the tech space, kind of getting me on the Cisco world, networking world in the late 90s. But to be honest, most of my childhood,
You
I
were kind of
was
an early adopter on the tech stuff.
very early. I
Yeah.
mean, literally when, I looked up to him big time, and, when I was 8 or 9 in like the late 80s.
Wow.
He worked for Penn State in the early 90s, and I would dial up on a modem and connect to his server, and we'd chat back then, even back then.
Wow.
And I still remember him telling me about this thing called the World Wide Web for, all the older folks that remember dialing up to bulletin board systems back in the day.
Yeah.
That was pre-web. And,
Okay.
he was describing all this stuff. So that was kind of my first fascination. My father worked for
And how old
IBM.
were you, John? At that
I
point?
was between kind of 8 and 11 or 12
Wow.
at the time.
Pretty formative.
Yeah, it was helpful. But after that, my life, I was an athlete. Probably mediocre Division I athlete, but I ended up getting recruited to University of Maryland, coming from Orchard Park, New York, which for the Bills Mafia people out there, that's what's up. That's the home of the Bills Stadium. So I ended up getting recruited down, and in my mind at the time, being 18 years old, all I cared about was working out and playing sports.
Playing sports.
Yeah, but I got introduced to, hey, your marketing major might not be as useful as you hope. Here's some Cisco books, go learn it. And frankly, everything I did was self-taught. I got a job at University of Maryland Network Operations Center. I got a certification, and honestly, that was a complete turning point.
And when time frame was that?
This was about 99.
So still really early on,
Yeah.
before kind of everything popped open.
Yeah.
I mean, it was starting to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started hands-on experience, and the rest was history.
Well, all right. So how do you go from working Cisco systems
Yeah.
to making it into the NSA?
So that was difficult, right? So at the time, so I graduated in 2002. So at the time, they weren't really teaching networking in college. But if you think about having to prosecute targets, ultimately, some of the best folks at it are IT, system admins, and Microsoft and networking people, because it can make sense.
There's a functional understanding of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a horrible analogy, but imagine if you're just dropped in the middle of the city and you had to operate, but you had no idea of where you were in the city, how you navigate around, get your bearings. It's the same thing in the virtual world. And so I think...
Can I tell you something interesting on that that I learned a while back? The Jedburgh teams that were part of the Office of Strategic Services, the predecessors to the CIA and Special Forces, a preponderance of the Jedburgh teams that went into Nazi-occupied Europe to combat, advise, and teach partisans were attorneys and school teachers.
Really? Why?
Well, the same thing you just said, right? If you've got to teach, if you have to advise, having a functional understanding.
It makes sense.
And so they were then equipped with tactics and the things, parachuting and the things that they needed for subversion and sabotage. But what was innately needed was the ability to teach and to make connections.
It's huge. I can tell you, this better than anyone. If you want to be great at anything, you have to master fundamentals first, and everything builds upon that. And that's been a challenge, obviously in the commercial world. And a lot of folks try and go from zero to I'm a security professional, but they skip all those IT fundamentals.
You see it a lot. And so you were self-taught.
Yeah.
You learned the fundamentals. You learned the ropes, and kind of around the Cisco systems, and then applied for the NSA. Was that how that worked? You knew you wanted to go that way?
I wanted to go that way. I was thinking of joining ROTC at one point, but then ultimately I was seeing all these job ads coming from the National Security Agency, and I was super intrigued. What a cool way to try and leverage networking knowledge that I had, and I always wanted to work for the government. And I love that place to death. But back in the day, they were not taking an interview from a marketing major, whether you had self-taught or not. They're actually looking for a lot of computer scientists, which actually doesn't help a lot with network analysis.
Right.
They're just actually kind of different, and so I begged and begged and begged and begged, and finally they gave me an opportunity to do an interview. And this was where it was a little bit of a winding road. I did really well in the interview, got a job offer, and I turned it down. Ended up working for Bechtel, working on staff in their network operations center.
Because just something better came along in terms of finances, or
I was I had no money.
Or you,
I had no money.
You're broke.
And Bechtel offered me, $15,000 a year more, and that was like everything at the time. Funny thing though, fast forward 9 months later, I was at NSA and I took a big pay cut, and it was the best.
Was it
decision.
because you got to Bechtel and you just like, this is not what I should be doing?
It was fine. It was decently technical, but I was working 8 to 4:45 in the morning. The night experience turned out to be very useful later in the career, but and then 4 to 4:45 in the morning, and it was I just had this burning desire to want to get into the intelligence world. Yeah. And so I ended up reapplying and said, you know what, the pay doesn't matter. Let's take a pay cut and go take a crack at this.
Well, I've met people just across the spectrum in the intelligence community, special operations community, law enforcement. Yeah. It's not true for all of them, but a lot of them knew early that they wanted to do this. Yeah. I mean, I know for me, like I wanted to be a Green Beret since I was 14. Mm-hmm. Was that kind of the case with you? Did you always kind of know like NSA? I mean, pretty early on is where you wanted to end up?
I didn't know. I actually was seriously thinking of going to the military because in my mind it was like, well, you're a D1 athlete, you're super fit. But in hindsight, after being tons of operators, I don't think I would have made it through, a lot of that stuff. I think there's a lot of athletes that actually fail in that,
there's a whole mental component too.
Yeah. And so, but I was pretty hardened my last 2 years of college that I absolutely wanted to work for the National Security Agency.
Okay. And so that formed up. And then when you got in there and you finally did, you got the offer, you started working there, what was your kind of your experience with the folks at NSA? What's it like? What are the people like there? Because it's such a, it's just such a mystery in terms of like, it's what you see in the movies, but like just in terms of just day-to-day folks, like what was it like?
Day-to-day folks everyone's like your next door neighbor. Yeah. First off, it is one of the greatest places, I've ever worked, if not the greatest I've ever worked in my life. I still have some dear friends that are there. I think what I was really struck by is, I came there, I think, right after 9/11 or within a year. And I still remember there were tons of people just staying in cots, sleeping in the building. You don't get to go there necessarily to get rich per se. What I was just impressed about, it was just such a mission-driven culture. And I started there when General Hayden was running it, and I've gotten to know him obviously in the commercial world since the launch of this company. Yeah. And I couldn't be more proud of the people I worked with and that agency and the mission and how hard they prosecute it. It's a very big place,
For sure.
Yeah. So finding your home that fits is definitely something that's important.
Yeah. Was there anything that stood out, like when you look back on it now or when you talk to your grandkids one day, like what will be the thing that you tell them? Because I always ask people who are transitioning from the military, I say, what's the thing you'll tell your grandson when you're bouncing him on your knee about those people and that mission that stays with you all these years later?
I think for me, it was just they were so selfless, right? It was all about the mission. And then I always I say this in my own company, I always like the brotherhood, sisterhood model of operating where we're going to work our butts off. We don't care if we sleep, but we're going to go have a few beers. If you drink or not, it doesn't really matter. The point is we want to spend time. So, a bunch of those folks, when my kids were growing up, their kids were young. They were always over at our house on the weekends and things like that. And that has stayed with me for a long time. And then the funny part about the job was you learn a lot about humans when I spent about 12 years, you're watching people and they don't never know they're being watched. Boy, you learn a lot about humans as well, good and bad. You know, it's really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So you ended up leaving the agency though. Yeah. And then you ended up coming back and ultimately became a counter-proliferation analyst. Yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I had left, did a short stint kind of in the commercial world, back just doing networking stuff. And obviously, it's not a secret, we've been dealing with this Iranian nuclear weapons issue for a long time. And so, I came back to really help put the puzzle pieces together on what was actually going on. There was a lot of talk of a pause, and some of the national intelligence estimates and really, it was a really big deal. Like this is a country, I think a lot of us could agree, it's pretty dangerous for them to have a nuclear weapon. Absolutely. And we probably never want that to happen. And So it was really about trying to put the puzzle piece together. You know, I had some experience with that part of the world, and that's how it really started. And we had to build a lot from not much, and really put that picture together.
And, you know, I know my limited experience in the intelligence community in the like 2008, 2009, when we were looking at foreign terror networks. What struck me was just the heavy interagency presence that was around. In our case, we were looking at you know, pipelines of bad guys moving in and out of certain countries, and you know, how do you mitigate that? How do you interdict that? But there were so many, the organizational complexity around that problem. The problem itself was wicked, in the sense that it was ill-structured and very complex. The organizational complexity around trying to figure it out was even worse, in my assessment. Did you see, like, in terms of interagency, you know, work, what was that like?
There was a lot of interagency work going on, and I would say there were some awesome parts to it and some challenging parts to it. And one of the things I always felt is, you know, the National Security Agency is one of our premier intelligence agencies, and it's very effective at helping put the puzzle picture together. What a lot of people don't know is, and I don't think it's changed, is NSA is not allowed to do what we call all source analysis.
Right.
We can only analyze SIGINT. And
tell us what SIGINT is.
Yeah, SIGINT is signals intelligence. So it could be from any sort of electronic intercept that you could do through various means, would be considered SIGINT, where a human org would be more like, you know, CIA and DIA and things like that. Yeah, people. And so I think one of the challenges is, how do you come together when you're actually assessing, you know, it's when you're dealing with a highly complicated topic like development of nuclear weapons, like it requires the level of like actually knowledge on nuclear weapon systems and design and production and all that, on top of lots of technical and human and you name it, to put this whole picture together. And I think one of the challenges I always felt, and it wasn't any bad intention necessarily, was when you are a collector and you have success, it's a lot different than only being fed information. You have to have a hypothesis. You have to you have an idea what you think is going on. You have to go prosecute to figure out a way to put the puzzle picture together. And I really felt like in our intelligence community, one thing that would be, you know, really powerful is to actually open up all source analysis to some other agencies as well, because I found sometimes it was being driven too hard by, you know, a small group, you know, mainly at Langley. It wasn't that they were bad humans or anything like that. They're actually wonderful humans. The challenge is, it's a lot different when you only get fed, and until you have to actually, you know, feed yourself.
You know, the metaphor that I have always used for that, John, is if you think about like an archaeological dig site,
right?
Okay, like let's say we're out, you know, somewhere in your neck of the woods in Colorado, and we've discovered, you know, a tar pit, right? And there's clearly some fossils in there that are big finds, and there are 7 archaeological companies contracted to dig around this one specific site, which would seem silly, but for whatever reason that's the case. And so you've got a left limit and a right limit of where you can dig with your shovel, right? And so, you know, it's if you were to imagine that, like, you go in with your shovel and you unearth and you can see, you know, a femur, right? And then I go in with my shovel and on the other side I can see, you know, a toe. And this goes on and on, like each person kind of digging in there, and then until eventually the picture reveals itself, right? But it's like, damn, we could have done that a lot faster. Like that picture could have been revealed much faster, but because of the self-imposed constraints, you had to discovery, learn, and reveal one thing at a time. Did you see anything that resembled that kind of reality?
I did. I think, you know, obviously coming out of the Iraq War, there was a lot of hesitancy on WMD and the kind of intelligence picture. And I felt like sometimes like the burden of proof got to the point of ridiculousness. I mean, even if you looked at the IEA, for the longest time, they talked about Iranian possible military dimensions. Come on, there's no possible. We know very well. You know, and I think there was just a little too much conservatism and watering down of languages. And
what do you attribute that to? Is that parochialism? Is that career progression? Is that just risk aversion? Because I mean, it is a problem, and it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Particularly inside the Beltway.
Yeah.
I mean, not just in the IC either.
Yeah.
But certainly in the IC. So, you spent a lot of time there. What the hell's what is leading to that?
I have like a feeling in my gut that there was some hesitancy to trying to be so careful as not to kick off another military conflict.
Get it right.
That it was kind of forcing the entire message to be watered down.
Okay.
I think there was probably subconsciously some of that going on. I don't believe necessarily it was just complete malintent, like we're going to give the wrong picture to the president of the United States because we don't want him to bomb. I don't think that at all. I think there was just such a reeling reaction to kind of the Iraq war intelligence that it was like, we have to get it so right, but the act of getting it so right, almost when you're controlling every little word you're going to put in assessment. And at the end of the day, any policymaker, he just wants to hear the layman's terms. What do you think's really going on?
Well, I think that's how most humans are.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, I didn't ascend to the level of command that a lot of my peers did, but I certainly worked at a high enough level that you get to a point you're like, dude, just tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
So that I can evaluate the reality of the situation and make a decision.
Yeah.
So if you back it up just a little bit, John, can you tell us in your own words, in the layman's terms, a counterproliferation analyst? The Iraq war and the Afghanistan war is raging at this time. The global war on terror is in full swing. It was a different time, man. It was a very different time, and it's evolved a lot. What did a counterproliferation analyst, like, what was the scope of your work that you can tell us anyway?
Yeah, I'm gonna edit a bit of it, really at the end of the day, we have to take collection. From various forms. We have to make sense of it and actually try and put the story together of what we think is the current state of the program, right? And so if you think counterproliferation also cover, chem bio and things like that, I didn't do that. I was strictly nuclear. So part of it is you actually have to get really trained up on nuclear weapons.
Keeping the wrong weapons out of the wrong hands.
That's it.
Is what we're talking about here.
We're trying to put the picture together, and so policymakers can make a decision on how they want to deal with it.
Okay,
and so,
that's helpful.
Yeah, and so the Iranians really had a full-on Manhattan-style program for a while.
Really,
it was called the Ahmad Plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'm going to overly simplify it, but essentially they had a project called 110. Project 110 was what we'd call the physics package or the implosion system. Right, this is the part that goes boom. All right, in order for that to work, you need fissile material. So we all know about Natanz and Qom and the underground enrichment facilities that they've been able to build. And there's also a project named 111. And by the way, just to be very safe here, everything I'm going to talk about is actually from a public book and no special information. David Albright has written the Iran's Perilous Pursuit of Nuclear Weapons, and it is an absolute fantastic book. It's technical, but if anyone wants to really know what the heck was going on, I think that was a really great work. Can't praise it enough from my experience. And then you had Project 111, and that was to fit a nuclear warhead into a reentry vehicle on the Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile. And so all these projects were going full gas in the early 2000s. And then the Iraq war kicks off. And this is what was really interesting. There was a kind of resistance group that outed Natanz at one point as an underground enrichment facility. Turned out we found another one later on this is all public now, called Qom. And if you really looked at the program, they were making a lot of progress on the weaponization piece. Enrichment takes a lot longer to get going in some cases. And so, I don't know this for sure, but my gut tells me when we went into Iraq, if you think about Iran-Iraq fought a bloody 8-year war to a stalemate, and what was it, a week after we were in there, we had M1 Abrams drive behind Baghdad Bob on TV, and then we called them part of the Axis of Evil, and there's a lot of, hints and flexing, maybe we turn right and keep going. that caused them to kind of radically change what they were doing, kind of push things underground, slow certain like really, salacious activities and focus on things they don't think they finished.
Right.
And that was really kind of how this all kicked off in the 90s under something called the Physics Research Center.
Okay.
So it was a real deal program. And I would say the interesting part is all that infrastructure is pretty much intact today.
Really?
Yeah. That's why I think now is a really topical time. I mean, Iran's in a different place as a country right now.
Well, yeah, and I mean maybe, and again, you help us unpack this because what I'm interested in is how we can set this context so that folks living in the everyday could get their head around it and understand what it means to them when they hear us talking about, or they hear influencers or leaders talking about Iran. And the nuclear program. I mean, from my limited point of view, as I look at this, again, looking at the human connection side of it, right? I look at what's happened with the war with Israel, right, and October 7, and then in the incursion into Gaza, Hezbollah, Hamas, and of course the clear involvement of Iran in that, the targeting that's happened of senior leaders and bringing it right to Iran in that regard. I have to think the killing of Soleimani.
Yeah, it's a big one.
From us. So I have to think that if you tell me that just technically the program is still intact, a lot has happened on the honor and vengeance side. That in addition to this multi-year narrative of just, ushering in an apocalyptic end of days that many of them believe in. How does that factor in? Like, in other words, you talk about where they are technically. What's your read on just where we are contextually with everything that's happened?
This is why I think it matters for the human connection. I mean, we have been at war in the Middle East between Iraq and then obviously a little bit in, with Afghanistan for so long. Yet we're in a complete technology and production power struggle with China, and then we have the Russian activity going on over Ukraine. Like, this is complicated, and I think the reason this matters is, this has to come to some resolution somehow, because what we don't need is to be getting dragged back into a lot more involvement in this region for a protracted period of time while taking our eye off the ball on China. I mean, we can already see how warfare has changed a lot in the Ukraine war from the kind of GWAT days.
We talked about that last night. Just the migration of tactics, techniques, and procedures around armed drones.
It's insane.
It's crazy.
And so if I take a really big step back and let's look at the history, I would distill it down as this, right? Iran had a full-on program. The long pole in the tent was the fissile material, and obviously some other testing I think they had to do or probably still need to do. And when I say the program's intact, I would say the infrastructure's intact if a decision was given. I think that's the key, differentiator here. And so, if you look at Iraq, they freaked out when we went in and made lots of progress. And so they reorganized everything. But if you really looked at the program, it was organized under a new name. It wasn't called Ahmad, but the gentleman that was leading it was a guy named Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was presumably assassinated several years ago. He was their Oppenheimer. He was their Oppenheimer for sure. He was been around from the beginning. So you had metallurgy departments, you had health and safety for radioactive fires and things like that. You had explosives groups, and all this is detailed in the book. Still missile programs, weather activity was really going on the nuclear part of that, but it doesn't matter. Guidance, kind of solid fuel, liquid fuel, it's not easy stuff to get right. All that was preserved. And then you fast forward to kind of 05, 06 in Iraq, where we have the civil war kicking off. Americans are being killed by the EFPs. We all know Soleimani's hands were all over that activity. Probably had that coming for a long time. And I felt like they got a little bit bolder, right? And then you fast forward, and there was this push to do a deal to basically lengthen the timeline that Iran could break out. Because this is the thing we always worry about: is what is the breakout time, right?
And what do you mean by breakout time?
It's a time if a decision was made to create a nuclear weapon, and test one. How long would that be? Okay. And there's a difference between testing one and actually putting it on a system you can reliably deliver. And so that's why they picked ballistic missiles, because I think we saw an Israeli attack. Air defense worked great, but a lot got through too.
Yeah.
So you fast forward, we're getting bogged down in Iraq. I think these guys are getting a little bit more, emboldened from that. Interesting. I felt like something that checked them in history was the whole Green Revolution, the protests in the Middle East.
Right.
There's nothing that scares the Iranians more than regime survival. And almost all their decisions will be dictated by regime survival.
It almost seems like they foment instability abroad to just keep the focus off the internal problems.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I totally believe that. I mean, and then you fast forward to a deal that I think was very well intentioned, done under the Obama administration. I did not agree with it, but I was just a peon doing my job here, so I had obviously zero say. And it was a whole deal, and it was called JPO, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And the whole point was we're going to make a deal with Iran. IEA inspectors are going to come back in, and they're going to have to ship their uranium out of country, right? Which they were doing for a while. Meanwhile, full ballistic missile programs still intact. The organization formerly known as AMAD, now called SPND, led by their Oppenheimer guy and all their folks, still intact. There was some, what appeared to be assassinations against some pretty key members in there over the years, obviously not done by us. And then enrichment was still intact, and they're still developing new centrifuges all the way up, I believe, to an IR6 now, which is carbon fiber and very modern. So where are we? We are in a weird situation where the work by presumably Mossad with the pager attacks, and then the military campaign against Hamas, and then I think multiple countries targeting the Houthis has really degraded, because the fear all the time is you pushed Iran too hard, the proxy forces pop off, they'll close the Strait of Hormuz, and now you're in a full-on shooting match over there. And I think that's what a lot of the policy decisions were made to prevent. But here we are, the rial is weak. It's very weak right now, so their economy is not strong. That's their currency. Their proxy force projection is much weaker than it once was.
Almost decimated.
They have Trump pulled out of the JPOA deal, right or wrong. And they said, okay, fine. Well, we're not going to stick to 3.5% enriched uranium. They kept upping it over the years. So what they've been doing is literally nuclear blackmail to get concessions, in the international community.
Knowing that they could take it up whenever they wanted.
Yeah. Now, they're going to risk getting attacked, I think, if they do that. But
they always retain the option.
Yeah, they retain that option. And so now you fast forward to today. I think when you saw the missile attacks from the killing of Soleimani, they were pretty accurate. They landed right on the tents on our base. I mean, they were accurate. And then you look now, they're sitting with about 5 bombs worth, approximately, of 60% enriched uranium. That's like a week and a half or two to go to 90. Now, that still has to be converted, I won't get too technical, but from uranium hexafluoride to metal, casted, and all that stuff. And that takes time, and there would be observables and, presumably, but that's also banking on you have a great intelligence picture. I'm not in that game anymore. And I think the real challenge and where this human connection is so important, this is a very globally interconnected world now. And activities in the Middle East affect us, but at the same time, we're in an epic technology race, and the Chinese are not slowing down their aggression on us.
Right.
And I think this program is so important to have a flashlight shined on it right now, because a weakened Iran, backed into the corner, economy's rough, regime survival is their number one, kind of purpose in life. I'm not even sure they know what to do right now. It is either...
Which is a dangerous place for a nation state.
Very dangerous.
Dangerous
place for humans.
Because that's right. Because, at a human level, when we go into survival mode, right, the fight, flight, or freeze, the sympathetic nervous system takes over, and the frontal cortex shuts down.
Yep.
And rational thought goes out the window. As Dr. Ivan Tyrrell says, anger makes you stupid.
Yep.
Fear even more.
Yeah.
So, we're not immune to that. They're not immune to that as a collective.
Right.
Right. That stuff, that's a human dynamic that happens at scale.
Right.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is with the technical residual capability of it that's still there, and then you add to the cocktail a real plethora of human emotions here.
Yeah.
Where they've kind of had their ass handed to them on multiple occasions, and a lot of reasons for retribution, honor, and survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe a different calculus in play.
This is my fear. I mean, I think it's coming down to hardcore negotiations, but it can't be a deal like Japan where you gave them a ton of money, you let them keep all this infrastructure, you let them keep their nuclear weapons, frankly, org in place. I mean, it was just insane. If you ask me. But now it's coming down to negotiate or completely dismantle. But they're thinking Libya in their head too. What happened to Gaddafi? He gave up his program, and I saw the pictures of him ended up in the back of the truck.
Not too pleasant.
Yeah, not too pleasant ending. And
again, another very human factor, right? Is like, even though it's a nation state, when you talk about regime survival, it's a handful of old men who don't want to end up like Gaddafi did in the back of a truck.
Exactly.
I mean, that's really what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about.
And with a level of capacity at their fingertips.
Yeah.
So what is in your experience with this? I mean, what are we looking at in terms of as we think about policy options or just options available to the Iranians and to the West?
I think we're getting down to very few viable options right now, maybe two. I think the options are, I feel like if the Iranians were smart, negotiate, take all this stuff down, start making money again as a country, get commerce open back up, but it has to be a completely verifiable. They've been playing all these games for years. No, we never had a weaponized nuclear program. The supreme leader is a fatwa against nuclear weapons. It has to be a real negotiation, and they can't retain the latent capability to put this stuff together.
But I just wonder, do they have that kind of sectarian capacity to step away from the ideology that would allow them to do that? Maybe I'm just being too stereotypical here, but
they're very crafty negotiators. I think, like, culturally, they've been known that for a long time. They play the long game quite frequently, and I think they've been kind of like juking and jiving, trying to play this long game forever. But it's come to a head, and I'm not sure there's unless the West and Israel gives them another out with some negotiation to kick the can a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of going on too long. It's either that or I think a military option is on the table. And there's been reporting about that, after Netanyahu came to meet Trump, that, I think, I'm sure Israel's been planning for a long time, but, you have deep underground hardened facilities. There's only so many, ordinances out there that could even have a shot to maybe work.
Yeah.
And so both options are fraught with a lot of risk. I think this is a very difficult time for the Iranian regime.
Well, it would be one thing if we were able to deal with this in isolation, like if you could just deal with the Iranian problem, but that's not the case at all. Right next door, you have Afghanistan, which, by the way, there are connections there, even in terms of of the bunkers and the depth of those facilities. I've heard things that our deals with Afghanistan have made that even more possible. With equipment and things like that. So I guess I'm just wondering, how do you manage the Iranian problem with all of the other global complexities happening at the same time?
Quickly. I think so, because this has to come to a solution. I mean, I think this is one reason, I'm not a political person, but I do think raising maximum pressure at a time when they're at their weakness is going to have to force us to resolve one way or the other, because we can't be distracted with this for another 10 years and then get surprised because our focus is on China and in the Ukraine-Russia conflict.
You've worked with this problem a long time, John, and you're not like one of these guys that admired the problem. Like, you were deeply involved as a practitioner in dealing with it. How worried are you about this?
I'm worried enough to be out of the community for 10 years and come on your podcast and talk about it. I think it's really come to a head. I think it's really, really come to a head. I get more worried, actually, just so you talk about the human connection, like, the most dangerous person is a cornered person.
Yeah.
And we're dealing with a handful of, Alatoyas that run that country.
Yeah.
That makes me nervous.
Yeah.
I think, just from a human standpoint.
Right. And really, I guess, I'm just trying to get my head around this. this is a policy level issue, right? I mean, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, for us as Americans, I guess being informed about it's helpful. Sounding off about it through our congressional leaders. I mean, what the hell else can we do?
Yeah, there's not much more. I think at the end of the day, it's awareness. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you know, I loved working in the intelligence community. I loved all our brothers and sisters. We worked with Aaron and special operations and everything. And I just think sometimes these really technical stories that are really impactful never get the real airtime. You know, it's a lot easier to have an easier to digest story. And I just thought it was really important to kind of put it in context, everything that's been going on in the Middle East.
No, I agree.
Our policy. And then, you know, when you talk about what the Chinese have been doing with their hacking against us, that makes me like double uncomfortable.
Well, and I want to pivot into that because I think that, again, you know, I've heard the argument over time is like, well, I'm just Joe Citizen. What can I do about it? And I've always, I mean, maybe it's the SF and Special Forces NCOs that taught me that, you know, if you want to get big stuff done, if you want to have a strategic impact, bottom up is a very powerful way to do that. Yeah. And you know, I will go to my grave believing that an informed citizenry on issues like this is important. If you just, because a lot of times, you know, we'll have a conversation like this and then I'll hear from folks, yeah, but what do I do?
Right.
Well, for starters, learn more about the problem. Yeah. Right. Get articulate on the problem, and then start to sound off on it. Right. Yeah. Like if you've got a position, like we've done with the homeland piece. Yeah. Right. And you know, maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, but I think there's enough there. Yeah. That we need to be vocal about this and demand that our government take a more serious posture. Yeah. On protecting the homeland against a violent extremist attack. So I don't necessarily, I'm still formulating in my mind just what you've said about Iran, but what I do know is that I feel like I'm more informed about it now than when we started.
I think it's really important. You know, this is a complex world and there's a lot of change going on in our own country. And it's just really important to be educated, but not educated with fear or anything like that.
You sit around wringing your hands.
Yeah, just
you know, but understanding what you're up against there. The first special ops imperative is understand your operational environment.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
So let's pivot into because with your experience in the cyber world. And, you know, the hacking that we always hear about that. And it's something that we've talked a lot about is the homeland threat. I've had Sarah on the show, legend.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like we always kind of talk about the asymmetric Islamist violent extremist threat, which is a real thing. And then when you consider the nexus potentially with Iran, but there's also another side to the homeland security piece that I think, again, not in a hand-wringing way, but in an informed citizen way, I would personally like to understand more.
Sure.
When we talk about hacking and cyber from China, North Korea, Iran, bad actors, what could that potentially mean to everyday folks just trying to get through their lives? What does that look like? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I can. I'll paint the picture, I think, of the types of attacks that you see. Because, you know, we run a cybersecurity company I founded. We're doing 700 saves a week right now. And a lot
saves.
of it
saves. That's like where you prevent.
Yeah. We stop a hacker from breaking into the cloud or on-prem. And a lot of times it's ransomware and it's all crime-based stuff coming mostly from kind of the Russia part of the world. But when you talk about some of these other bad actors and take a big step back globally, right? Ransomware attacks, obviously they're extortion and continuity of operations destructive attacks. You have espionage where people are trying to come in and steal intellectual property. You know, I'll give a really simple example for anyone that works in manufacturing. You have CNC machines that cut a lot of parts. Yeah. We have done saves where we know the Chinese have come in to try and go and grab that AutoCAD file. That's the fastest way you can
just
cut
so they
out
can
all
put it
the
in their
R&D
plant and
cut it,
manufacture and undercut your cost.
Yeah, so it's a form of industrial and economic espionage that can make us less competitive and shorten. We spend all the money on R&D, and then they steal it.
But
and they
likely
shorten their
the
timeline.
State of China sponsoring and fomenting that.
Absolutely. Then you have, I would say, almost types of attacks that are setting the stage. You know, you probably call it preparation in the environment of the battlefield.
Yeah.
Like
Yanni and I talked about in our last interview was about the shaping. Yeah. And how what a powerful role that can play.
Yeah, and so it was in the news, but I don't think it was like quite digestible enough. So I'll answer your question, but tee it up. So it came out that the Chinese were hacking U.S. telecom infrastructure. Right, as a former network engineer, I know a lot about these type of networks. Right.
Yeah.
Here is the biggest fear and concern. First off, telecommunication networks are largely, I'm going to overly simplify this, made up of things called routers and switches. So think Cisco Systems, Huawei around the world, Juniper, companies like that. These systems, when it used to be back in the day, we'd make a phone call and we call it PSTN. Different network than the internet stuff. This is all completely consolidated and converged now. So every phone call, text message, Uber, any cloud hosted application goes through the telecom networks. These networks also have things called lawful intercept systems. So, if someone's been indicted or they're surveilling them, counterintelligence people, potential spies that we're looking at, potential terrorists, the Chinese have been able to infiltrate over half a dozen major telcos in the United States. And the reporting that I've seen has shown that they've been actually get access to lawful intercept. Well, with lawful intercept systems, you can task numbers and listen to phone calls. You can steal SMS. You can still see where the person is located on what cell tower and physically find them. So there's a huge espionage concern, and there was a lot of reporting that both campaigns were spied on during this last election, right? Big nation state stuff. Here's my biggest concern, though. That latent access does also open up the opportunity and the possibility that in a time of conflict, you could destroy it.
What does that look like?
There is not a business in the United States that can operate without IT, and most of them access cloud. Almost every single thing you do on your phone or computer is accessing infrastructure hosted in the cloud.
So what are take it down?
Take
to
it
the
down.
Most,
yeah.
Like what are we losing here? Like what kinds of things?
If that type of worst case, I'd call it like the nuclear weapon of cyber.
That's the broken arrow there.
Yeah. If that goes down, you can't make phone calls. You can't send text messages. You can't check email. You can't get an Uber. You can't order food online. You can't get to any of the services.
Yeah.
That you interact with.
So
it rides over these telecom networks.
So that alone, is paralysis.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it was the Department of Energy, I hope I'm citing this right, that said that if you had that kind of infrastructure attack, we'd lose a significant amount of the population in a short period of time because of supply chain, food, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look at the West is just-in-time production, just-in-time delivery. That's enabled by one thing, networked applications, right? And when the core network goes down, you can't get to them anymore. All this really does fall apart. And, if you take a bigger step back and how does this impact humans and where you should be, I think, loud, talking to policymakers is we can't really make a phone in this country, a monitor, a computer. We can design them all, but the actual production isn't there. Most of the telecom boards and equipment is made overseas, which opens up supply chain risks, to this equipment as well.
Big time.
And I just think we need like a moonshot effort in our country to really bring back semiconductor manufacturing, to bring back production of our phones and our laptops and computers. And it needs to be in a geography in the world we control. And you think about how many semiconductors are made in Taiwan, not exactly a safe place for the U.S. because this all leads up to the race for AI supremacy.
Talk about that.
The ability, I mean, we're using AI quite heavily, artificial intelligence, to help us catch and stop hackers. It's extremely effective. But when you think about the future of warfighting and watching the drone activity and all the innovation that's happened from relatively low-cost platforms in Ukraine, you think about what does a conflict with a peer adversary look like in the future, and how much does compute and network systems and applications, yet half the stuff's being built over there.
Right.
We can't build it here.
It's like you're surrendering your own agency in the war before it even starts.
Yeah. Do you remember how hard it was to get even a monitor during COVID?
Yeah.
It was supply chain fell apart. I mean, this should be a huge warning sign to the U.S. because you're going to get to the point of AI-controlled drone swarms in warfare. I mean, we're seeing the drone use there.
I think we're right on the edge of it.
Yeah. AI, just simulations, fighter simulations, wargaming.
So
This is incredibly important.
Yeah, man. There's two things that so I don't want to lose the bubble on this.
Yeah.
When you think about this, we always talk about a nexus, right?
Mhm.
There's these different connections that could happen, for example, between state and non-state
Yeah.
actors. And one of the things that's always kind of concerned me is there's always this, almost seems like out of hand dismissal of this nexus that exists, And I get it. I mean, you want to be cautious about this, but it's kind of like when we were talking about earlier in the interview where folks were so conservative in their analysis that unless it's black and white, you see it in front of you, that you don't make assumptions on a potential nexus. But as I think about just like as a former special forces operator, whose charter is to go into other places and basically create chaos by, with, and through action, subversion, sabotage. I think about like what you said. So if you had asymmetric strikes going on, say by October 7 style events, right? And you happened to coincide that or nest that with the kind of hack or cyber attack that you just described, that broken arrow,
the bad one.
You're talking about a level of systemic paralysis that would preclude any kind of response. So if in the event that, for example, the Bedouin school siege, right, where they seized that school in Russia and they held those kids hostage with explosives, what's the ability to respond? What if that happens across 5 schools in 5 states and now all the systems are shut down?
I think we saw the natural disaster in North Carolina.
Absolutely. Western North Carolina. That's just what I was thinking
You were
about.
there.
I wasn't, but a lot of SF guys were. And my family's from there. And it illuminates a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
And that's in a pretty rural area.
It is.
Imagine major metropolitan cities and things like that. So I think to me, like, really the kind of, call to education here is, we are tech-enabled information society, yet we don't actually really fully control the supply chain that produces it. That has to change. We have to have way, way more focus on securing our telecommunication infrastructures. This should not happen.
Right.
This should not happen. And it's it's a blip on the news, and it sounds nerdy, so people don't want to pay attention. But if you just step back and think about how everything works in our society today, how we talk to each other. Yeah. I mean, so much is over Teams and Zoom and you name it. None of that works. Right. And so it's just something where I think it's a latent, serious risk for the United States that needs attention.
In addition to the policy level engagement that needs to happen. And like you said, a moonshot where there's some kind of declarative move by this administration or someone hopefully soon that says, okay, we're going to bring this home. Yeah. Right. We're going to bring this kind of semiconductor production home. And that would take a while.
A while.
But would you say, is it too much to say that communities around the country should also step back and at a community level, at a grassroots level, start to ask themselves hard questions at a contingency branch and sequel level of, for example, what if the conditions that you just described happened, 1, in isolation, 2, with, the wildfires? Who's to say that in the next wildfire, China doesn't use that as an opportunity to invoke a hack or
stardom
or worst case, a straight up October 7 style attack that does have enough of a nexus that these hacks could happen and you have this all comms lost too. I guess what I'm asking is it worth our time, and in your estimate as a pro on this, for communities to be thinking about this and what would that mean? What kind of analog and old school communications and systems would we need to have in place to deal? Because I'm telling you, man, in Western North Carolina, ham radio operators were popular fellows again.
I bet. I think what the local communities and municipalities really need to do is, you hear SCADA attacks and things like that.
What is that?
SCADA is basically that nexus between a computer that tells, something physical to open or close, and it could be a dam. It could be just for wastewater treatment, opening pipes and things like that.
Okay.
They're used in jail cells, opening and closing the jails. I think a lot of the local and regional sort of municipalities have very, very, very weak infrastructure, and it even opens up to some criminal tax. I think it was even in Florida, someone did break into a water treatment plant and dumped a whole bunch of lye into the water. Luckily, there's a 12-hour delay from what I read between that change hitting the actual water supply, so someone is able to pick up on it. I think asking the hard questions, or if you're in IT, making sure you're really thinking about more secure, hardened, zero trust type network design. I think that's important because, the broken arrow incident might not happen because that would probably kick off a war.
Right.
But you could absolutely have much more local, regionalized attacks. I mean, we've seen tons of cities get ransomware, and most of the city operations come to a halt pretty quickly there.
What about looking at it just through the lenses of first responders and law enforcement? And, if, again, I keep going back to Western North Carolina when all of those comms went down, and how do you respond in those kinds of situations?
You have to have non-IP based kind of fixed communication. So radios are really good. I would say like one, as you guys know, mesh radios kind of came, during the war on terrorism. They were super useful for a lot of operators because you could auto sync folks. It's encrypted. That type of technology I know was used during Hurricane Sandy when that came to New York City. So having the ability to frankly, the radios are great, but I think more of a mesh radio that can carry high speed data and also do push to talk and everything else. That type of technology is really good to kind of roll in and have an emergency setup.
And of course, the time to do that is before the crisis occurs.
Yeah.
I mean, to at least get familiar with it and identify what your solution sets.
I think that type of technology can be really good. And I think for a lot of places it would be affordable too. But it's just a great backup that isn't connected to the internet per se or the cell phone network. So you're not beholden to this. You can set up your own ability to transact and call.
Well, one of the things I was talking with Sheriff Chris Nacco, he's a Pasco County Sheriff, and we were talking about this kind of thing. And, he very much subscribes to, again, not the hand wringing, but just the kind of threat-based, scenario-based thinking of different things that could happen. And the reality that is, if any version of those things happen, Sheriff Nacco and his deputies are the ones that are having to eat that, right? Yep. They're the ones that are really having, and then communities are having to step up, right? And one of the things that he said that I thought was really profound is like, you and I are having this conversation right now, but I hope city managers and state senators and governors are listening to this, because there is why do we have to wait for federal funding? Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's nice. But frankly, there are budgetary moves that municipalities and cities and counties and states can do to start to explore, like you said, the mesh communications and start to look at realities that would allow us to at least mitigate the kind of effect you're talking about.
Yeah, and it might come into play during a natural disaster, not even 100%. Some external influencer. Yeah. So I think you should always, as a municipality or any legitimate operation, have a COOP plan, a continuity of operations plan. And comms are at the central of everything we do. And the other reason I mentioned some of these, more radio type technologies that can transmit data is then you can also transmit GPS, so you know where your folks are. That's really important.
So good. Too. Just yesterday I was doing some coaching with a politician out of Ohio. He's a state politician, and he was telling me about this 100-year flood they had in his little town, like 40,000 people, and they were in the emergency operations center. That was their incident command center. Right. He was the county auditor. But he was part of the IC team, and he was in there, and he told me that they had 26 fire departments responding.
Wow.
Not one of them worked on the same radio.
Wow.
So what they ended up having to do was they had to put one rep from their fire department in each boat with a radio.
Inoperable radios. It must have been encrypted.
But I think it proves the point, right? Like the time to figure that shit out is the left side of the crisis. And I hope that, because you've taken us from Iran down to like a cyber attack here at home. But what really manifests in all of that is the human reality of who inherits that at a local level.
Yeah, exactly.
And
how
what
do
does
they
it mean to
keep
us?
comms up? I didn't even think of the Captain Obvious answer too, Starlink.
Right.
Low cost Starlink. You can extend range with some of these mesh radios and really get, real world connectivity back. I would say that's another no-brainer. You just look at the Ukraine war, it's running most of their drone operations.
I'll take you a step further.
Yeah.
During the hurricane's effects of Western North Carolina, there were special forces and other volunteer groups that set up base camps. Musk donated Starlinks, got them pushed out, and then they would chopper them in and mule pack them in. I had relatives who received Starlink systems in cutoff valleys from GWAT veterans that pushed those things out there.
Unbelievable.
So, and I know we're pushing here, but there's one other thing I really want to get your take on, and I don't know how much of this is in your. This is fascinating stuff, by the way, and we'll have to do this more.
Sure.
But the drones, right? So you and I talked about this last night when Yanni was over at the house for dinner, and it really bothers me, man. Like I look at the migration of these TTPs, these tactics, techniques, and procedures in Ukraine, and just like as a casual observer, on open source, looking at how the surgical nature of those things has evolved, how much smarter they've gotten, how much more efficient, the Ukrainians and the Russians have gotten at use of those things, where they can loiter, they can. Even like casualties off the battlefield now, like we had the golden hour in Afghanistan because you could move a casualty, like my buddy Romy, who was shot through the neck. He sat where you sat. But they saved his life because they got him off the battlefield so fast.
Right.
No way that would have happened in Ukraine.
Right.
Because the guys carrying the litter would have eaten 3 drones just trying to get him off the battlefield. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's become so pervasive.
Yeah.
John, and then to see, like, most recently, I know an international cartel used it to strike a prison, an assassination down there very effectively, like caved the roof in South America. And then we've heard, at least Fox News was reporting, that cartels were using armed drones to target Border Patrol on our own border. Now, I don't know the veracity of that, but I just, with the border having been open for the last 4 years and the ease of movement of different munitions and things like that, I have to believe my biggest concern is that if there is a homeland threat by Islamist violent extremist groups that is a complex attack across multiple nodes, Yanni sat in the chair you sat in, and he said strategic surprise is a foregone conclusion. Like they're going to get it.
For sure.
Because that's what they thrive on. It seems to me that a great way to achieve strategic surprise and some level of systemic paralysis are multiple armed drone strikes across vulnerable areas in the United States, to include airports.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think the Ukraine war proved 3D printers, get a production line up, you can pump out a high volume. Now Russia's doing it too. And to counter jamming action, now this works closer. They're using fiber optic controlled drones. They have a string attached to them, basically a fiber optic, so you can't jam them out of the sky anymore. I think, as a country and probably a defense partner, I saw some new stuff in F-16s recently. We need much lower cost, high volume ability to counter drone activity. And I think we need a lot more hardening. I mean, you hear about all the drone sightings, but the reality is to weaponize them is actually not too hard.
That's and I keep getting pushback on that. I keep getting self-proclaimed experts that are telling me we don't need to, they're not there yet. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. We're seeing this like play out. And the one thing I did learn in my career as an SF guy was, if I'm thinking about it here in Riverview, Florida, sitting with you, I don't think I'm the guy that came up with it, right? Yeah. Like there's clearly these are organizations that are striving to achieve strategic surprise against us, to hit us with a level of horrorism that it systemically paralyzes us, right? I can't see a scenario where they would not bring those into play. And like you just said, even just with wire-guided drones, I mean, and I talk to a lot of state and local folks, and they reach out after these podcasts, our book, The Gathering Storms, addressing a lot of this, but they all say that the sheriffs that I talk to, the city police officials, they say they're nowhere near confident in their local, anti-drone or counter-drone capability.
Absolutely not. I mean, I think if you don't believe it, go to Reddit and go to Ukraine War video report. Pretty graphic, I'll warn you ahead of time, but go watch that and you see these small drone platforms and how much damage is going on. It's shocking. So like, to be so naive, like, yeah, maybe it's not today or tomorrow or something, it'd take time, but like, pretty low signature to buy a bunch of those.
But it goes to your point, man. Like when we were talking, and you were talking about when you were in counterproliferation, right? And you're dealing with the interagency, you're dealing with the IC, and there's this reluctance to say, well, there's nothing concrete that says this is happening.
Right.
But you see the indicators in other places. You look at like some of the more subtle realities, like an open border. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of our global war on terror veterans are hearing through communications of their humanitarian outreach. I mean, you start to me, the level of risk is so great at the homeland level that it's time for almost that moonshot in terms of how we defend our people. Yeah. I think the days of just living in the high side yellow compartmentalized information are gone. And like when it comes to defending the homeland, I think that there has to be, I hate to say it, but like there has to be a flattening and inclusion of other constituents, right? That can contribute to solving the problem set.
Yeah, the more people thinking about it and educated on it, we can get ahead of the game maybe a little bit and not just be surprised victims.
Well, especially when you consider the fact that, there've been a couple of attempts that I know of trained analysts and targeters trying to report information to Department of Homeland Security only to have the information referred to the Hurricane Operations Center.
Right.
Or other.
That's a challenge.
And so to Sheriff Nacco and others that they're like, we're the ones that are going to be dealing with this. Right. Yet we are forced to just sit here and wait on the top down. Yeah. If you're feeling like sharing it with us, you will. Sure. But we're the ones that are going to eat it. Yeah. We're the ones that are actually the targets of this, right? And so if we can't open the aperture and flatten and create a collaborative environment, I understand compartmentalized information and secret.
Too. Believe me.
I know you do. But I don't think that's what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here are threat pictures and realities that if we don't find a way to move faster in our analysis and assumptions and actions, they're going to get in front of us.
Well, I agree. I mean, it's the same issue we have in cyber. The government knows certain things. It takes too long to get out of there. And half the time when they're knocking on the door, you've already been a victim of ransomware. It's like, it's the same thing. And to me, the drone stuff is so important because, one, we need a much bigger capacity to manufacture the cheap ones that could be deployed in mass and swarmed and controlled. But at the same time, anything you're doing to, protect the locales from this technology will work on the battlefield.
Yeah, you mark my words when it does happen, and I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, me too.
But on the right side of that, on the right side of boom, there will be this massive skunkworks gathering of people that should have gathered in the first place. Yeah. There'll be no rules. Yep. Just like what happened when we got hit on 9/11. They put a bunch of operators in the room and they said, tell us what you need. Oh, you need saddles dropped from the sky? Right. Done. Right. And you need a hunting license? Done. Right. What else do you need? Right. But the problem will be, it will be on the heels of a catastrophic strike.
That's the issue. You got to get ahead of it.
You got to get ahead of it. And that's where I shake my head, because when I think about the cyber piece, when I think about the drone piece, when I think about a complex attack where we live, work, and play, you need that moonshot mindset of saying, okay, the government cannot solve this on its own. Right. We need a skunkworks kind of whole of nation, whole of community, board, council that's like literally crashing on this problem, where we're consumed by it and working it day and night. And I'm afraid if we don't get some version of that, and maybe even, I don't know, the whole Iranian thing, I guess that's a much more different animal, isn't it? Because it's almost exclusively policy and
it's for sure a completely different animal. I just really think if you really distill it down, it's semiconductor production, and this impacts drones and probably counter drone activities as well, telecommunications, medicine, We don't make enough medicine in this country.
Yeah.
And there's probably half a dozen or 6 to 8 core areas that need a heck of a lot more focus so we don't wake up really surprised. And I see your point on the drones, I totally agree with, because it's complete dual use technology that we can use for the military as well, or the military can develop. But there needs to be a much better partnership, private-public partnership, and a lot more inclusion at the grassroots level, and a lot more people talking about it.
And I think the inclusion at the grassroots level for me, is more because we had our head in the sand for the last 4 years, regardless of the politics.
Yeah.
We've had our head in the sand for the last 4 years, and we've allowed an open border, and we've allowed a Haqqani network, who's the Ministry of Interior, or the ministry to issue passports to jihadists to come over here legally.
Yeah.
So we have an unprecedented 4-year period where infiltration of Chinese nationals, bad actors, has occurred.
Yeah.
And so I guess, am I off base by saying that we kind of need to make some pretty radical assumptions on what's here?
Yeah. And I think it's frankly just common sense, right?
Maybe they're not even radical assumptions. They're just aggressive assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah. But, that's part of the job when you're an operator, you're an intelligence officer. You got to be thinking a few steps ahead, because you don't want to become a victim. And I think, I think highlighting this stuff is just really important, because trust me, there was a lot going on, leading up to 9/11 before that was like screaming at us.
Oh my God.
Something's going to happen.
And right of bang really sucks, man. It really sucks, because, I think about all the guys and girls that, and yourself included, that risked their lives and took action to keep us safe over the last 20 plus years. And to think that all that effort was put into it, and then something like that could happen here that could be so easily, not easily, but could definitely be precluded, at least mitigated.
Yeah.
And we've just deluded ourselves.
Yeah.
I really do. I feel like we've deluded ourselves at institutional levels. The aspects of hubris are so profane.
I think so.
And that it just blinds us. And then interviewing, like Duran, who sat where you are, and others from the Israeli Defense Forces and survivors of October 7. You know what the number one universal singular was in all those interviews? Hubris.
Yeah.
Every single one of them said it.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. It's so funny you use the left of boom, right of boom terminology. It's exactly what we use in cyber. And we have a structured way of doing attack surface reduction and then rapid response to stay left of boom, because boom is when encryption happens, your data's stolen. And it's like, we just need that same sort of mindset and approach to these core critical areas.
How do we do it?
How do you,
because it makes all the, people nod, but again, it goes back to a human connection thing.
It does.
Getting people to move left of any kind of crisis, on the left side of it before it happens. My experience has been is particularly in a time of churn, when there's so much distraction and disengagement and distrust and in-group, out-group behavior.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, just look at what people are doing post-election. Treating each other with contempt.
Yeah.
So when you have citizens, politicians speaking of contempt with one another, how the hell do you get left of anything?
It's hard. I don't know. I mean, it's got to be led from the top in some cases, and then from the bottom up. These two worlds have to meet. And
that's why I'm always harping on we got to get out of this trance state in terms of being mobilized against one another.
Yeah.
Because it precludes us from this kind of discussion of getting left of boom. And then our top-down leaders, regardless of party, if they're practicing that divisionist behavior where they're fomenting in-groups and out-groups, they're not thinking left of boom.
Yeah.
They're thinking tribal.
Oh, it's complete tribal.
Right? So they're not even looking at the problem we're talking about in reality.
Yeah.
Because the only way you solve that is you've got to bridge across those in-groups, out-groups, and actually say, in order to get left of bang, we would have to do these things, which would mean these in-groups, out-groups would have to work together.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's been interesting. We've built quite a successful company, and I've never been contacted once by the government to come offer help on certain areas where I know I'm an expert in. You know? Yeah, no, never. Even if it's just like advice on securing telecommunication networks, how you do X, Y, and Z. I think that's always a challenge. Is how do we get more commercial world experts helping the greater good on national security? Because so much of it's like defense contractor or not.
No, I agree.
Right?
I agree 100%. I think the same token,
Yeah.
like you have all these global war on terror guys and girls that stepped in and did humanitarian work with our allies, who happened to many of them be well placed, well vetted
Yeah.
assets,
Yeah.
human intelligence assets that were abandoned.
Yeah.
And then 4 years later, they're still on the phone with them.
Yeah.
They still have kept these relationships warm.
Yep.
And yet our federal government still lacks 99% of its human intelligence capability in those countries, because it's now being managed by dudes that have been retired for 5 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, and they've not been contacted. Yeah. So I think this gets back to my point that there needs to be, I think one of the most paradigm changing things we could do as a civil society on the leadership front is a whole of community, whole of nation, collaborative kind of approach.
Yeah, I agree. And it's much stronger alumni programs for really critical institutes.
Like NSA for life, special ops for life, like, you know, leveraging that, you know, in indigenous societies, they call them knowledge keepers.
Yeah, they do, don't they?
And, you know, the knowledge keepers, I mean, we do have the graybeards.
Sure.
But they're all generals.
Yeah.
I don't think this is an issue for generals. I think this is an issue for NCOs and practitioners like yourself who've done deep work. Those are the people that we need at the table, just giving their perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could have never done what I did without the National Security Agency in the commercial world. It's been incredible. But do you know how much more I've learned about stopping hackers in the commercial world? First off, we get way more reps.
You got way more relationship with practice, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's time in the grind is huge, like in anything you want to be good at.
Well, I want to wrap with this, John, and I think we'd be doing a disservice to people watching, but you've really built, like, I look at your career, you're such a humble dude, man. Like, you've been through it, but you've really built a great business. Like, you built a really solid business, and, you know, you're doing it the right way. When you look back on your time in starting a business and building it up, like, because there's a lot of people watching this who are doing that, either on the for-profit side, the nonprofit side, or maybe they're in transition and they want to do that, or they want to get into the IT sector. What advice would you give yourself if you were in that spot again, knowing what you know now?
First off, it really helps being a domain expert, whatever you want to be in business doing. I think that's really, really important. Focusing on fundamentals, I would highly recommend anyone want to get in network security and things like that. Go apply to the agencies and get in there and get after it. I'd say the biggest difference coming out of, and I'm not a military guy, so I can't speak for that, but coming out of the government is actually knowledge on how to go to market and do front-of-funnel lead gen and sell. Believe it or not, we knew how to make the technology. That wasn't an issue. We knew how to kind of transform how we catch hackers. That wasn't an issue. It's actually, and I never put two and two together. You think about how you target folks and make network diagrams of the infrastructure and the people and everything you want. Well, I never did that and almost went out of business in 2017. I'm like, how do I go after a specific vertical and dominate it, become an expert in that vertical? Because then word of mouth goes really fast. That's the highest form of conversion. So to me, I would say my advice is anyone looking to start any business, one, be data-driven up front. I always like to say, if you don't have the data, trust your gut, but try to figure out with data why your gut was right. I think that's really important. I think the second thing is make sure you put yourself in the shoes of the buyer and you actually do research on capacity and ability to pay. So you're not making a product in search of a problem
That's
to
a
solve.
whole nother podcast, bro.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. And then lastly, a lot of it, when you get to the scaling phase, is about repeatable process that isn't overly complicated with just a handful of data points that you can really look at and say, is this working or not working? How do I have to adjust course? What's been your
self-care resilience approach that's allowed you to kind of stay in the game?
I'm working on that. I don't know yet. I think for me, it's just positivity and excitement, and we really love stopping bad guys in the cyber world. And then the other part is like spending a lot of time with the people that are buying. Like, this is unfortunately the tough part, living on the road.
Yeah.
But being with the people that are actually giving you money and you're giving a service in return and getting to know them, becoming friends. I mean, that keeps me mentally motivated, right? And then obviously you have to work out and things like that, that normal stuff. But for me, I think it's more it's more mental self-care because the pace is so unbelievably high.
For sure. And I mean, just running any business or
Yeah.
owning a business is, but in your line of work, I can't imagine. Is there anything that we missed or that we didn't talk about that just in the context of cyber, the Iranian piece, drone, anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to hit?
I think we hit it all, Scott.
Yeah, man, we covered a lot of ground.
We covered a lot, and I know we went a little over,
I
but
don't
no, I mean, we covered a lot. This is all about education, you know, and also supporting our brothers and sisters in the community and helping raise the light and getting people. The next generation has to come in. What a great place to get experience. You know what I mean?
And so, what should people be on the lookout for as it pertains to AI, cyber technology? What are the big things? Leave us with a couple of things to be thinking about.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. So you're not a victim. AI is allowing specifically LLMs.
What is that?
Large language models. So think ChatGPT and things like that. It's allowing people to. Ever notice when you got a phishing email and they spelled color with a U and you knew it was probably for a British colony, usually Africa or something like that? AI is really breaking that language barrier down so it can be very credible. And so the extortion is really, really important. That's why, for those doing home banking or anything like that, really important to put multi-factor authentication where you have a code on your phone. It's also really important never to click links from emails, ever. Always look at the link first and maybe Google it. I think that's really important. And I would say, I think Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, said this the other week. Everyone should get an AI tutor. The hardest thing when people are trying to use AI in their daily life is being creative enough to know what to ask it and how to actually leverage it. And I found something really interesting. We work with older folks and younger folks, and sometimes I see the older folks have better fundamentals in certain core topics, right? The younger folks are better at using resources to get to an answer. And I'm not putting, people in two different categories, but I would encourage everyone, no matter your age, to really start experimenting with how can I solve certain problems in my life with AI? Because we as a society need to be significantly more educated on the good stuff and the bad stuff on it.
Awesome. All right. Well, John, thank you, man.
Thank
You've
you.
been super generous with your time, and I know I've learned a ton,
Likewise.
and I hope all of you have as well. You come back?
Heck yeah, I'll be back
All
any
right.
day.
Great. So thanks to everybody for watching. I hope you found this as informative and insightful as I did, and we'll keep this conversation going. And at the end of the day, remember, no matter what the context is, it all comes down to human connection. It really does. About that social capital, those tangible and intangible linkages that we build with each other so that we can get big stuff done. And we will certainly keep exploring that here. So until next time, we'll see you on the rooftop.